wanna know you. I really wanna go.
You could be sane one minute, put some drugs in your blood, then you do some stuff you never thought you would do.
Billy Preston wasn't just a musical genius. He was a man haunted by demons the world never really saw. And what happened to him is much worse than we thought. Sure, we know him as the fifth Beatle, the keyboardist who jammed with legends like the Stones and Ray Charles. Behind the feel-good hits and flashy performances was a man battling deep scars from being abused as a child, struggling with his identity in an industry that didn't want to talk about it.
He did confide in me. He did tell me that he was sexually abused as a little boy.
To being addicted, imprisoned, and ultimately left to die in a hospital bed, while the music world moved on without him. Billy's story isn't just tragic, it's infuriating. And the worst part? The people who could have helped him never really did.
Nothing from nothing leaves nothing. You gotta have something.
Billy was basically a musical genius from day one. Born in Houston but raised in LA, he never had a single music lesson. Just picked it all up on his own, like it was nothing.
He would sit on the organ bench with Mrs. Perkins, that was her name, and he watched her playing the two-level keyboard on the organ and the foot pedals, and he learned how to work that at the age of 9.
By the time most kids were still figuring out how to ride a bike, he was already killing it on the organ, backing up gospel legends. He even hit the stage with Nat King Cole, casually singing a hit song with him on TV like it was no big deal. And when Hollywood needed a young version of a music legend for a biopic, guess who got the part?
Would you join me, Mr. Cole?
I'll be more than happy to. You started off.
By his early teens, he was already deep in the music world, working with a gospel group that recorded a massive hit. Then he linked up with Little Richard and ended up in Hamburg, where he crossed paths with the Beatles before they were, well, the Beatles.
Well, I remember 1962 when I was over in Hamburg, Germany at the Star Club with Little Richard, and we were the headline act, and so my organ was sitting on the stage all the time. So the Beatles act, they were on opening, and I would always come out in the wings and watch them.
He played on a Sam Cooke album, dropped his own debut project, and started making a name for himself. Before long, he was lighting up TV performances, hitting the studio with icons, and even had a session with Jimi Hendrix and Little Richard in New York. Then Ray Charles brought him into the fold, and from there, it was like every big-name artist wanted a piece of whatever magic he was bringing to the table.
Don't let me down.
But Billy's story is one of immense talent and deep pain, and the abuse he endured as a child is a dark, tragic chapter that shaped much of his life. Though much of this remained private until after his death, Preston struggled deeply with the lasting trauma of sexual abuse and the conflict between his homosexuality and his religious upbringing.
He did confide in me. He did tell me that he was sexually abused as a little boy.
When he was around 9 years old, after moving to Los Angeles from Houston to perform in a touring production of Amos and Andy, he was repeatedly sexually abused by the production's pianist. This wasn't just a one-time incident. It lasted the entire summer. When he finally gathered the courage to tell his mother, she reportedly didn't believe him, leaving him unprotected.
He went to his mother, and he told his mother, and his mother was in denial and in disbelief and didn't protect him.
And it didn't stop there. Preston was also later abused by a local pastor, another betrayal by someone he should have been able to trust.
It was like nobody really cared. You know, you move on, but he couldn't move on.
Billy carried a lot that the world didn't fully see until after he was gone. Deep scars from the childhood trauma and a constant struggle between who he was and the beliefs he was raised with. It was a battle that never really left him. A documentary put together by a well-known TV director pulled back the curtain on his life, letting the people who knew him best tell his story. Friends and collaborators, from rock legends to gospel greats, shared their memories. The film kicked off with him at his peak, barely out of his early 20s, commanding the stage at a massive charity concert put together by George Harrison. Surrounded by a lineup that included some of the biggest names in music, he didn't just play, he owned the moment. At one point, the energy took over, and he jumped away from his keys, breaking into a full-on praise dance. It was pure joy, the kind that couldn't be faked. The band was on fire, the crowd was locked in, and for a second, nothing else mattered. Billy had a way of performing that pulled people in. His energy was straight out of the church, mixed with the fire of Little Richard and the soul of Ray Charles. He learned how to play in gospel choirs, but that same world that shaped his talent also left him carrying some of his deepest pain. Being a black gay man in that environment wasn't easy, and the abuse he endured there as a kid only made things more complicated.
He was a masculine man, and he liked masculine men.
The director of his documentary knew that struggle all too well. He was also black, gay, and grew up playing piano and organ in church. Their lives had eerie parallels. Both dealt with trauma that shaped the way they saw the world. Both lost brothers in tragic accidents, and both wrestled with the weight of experiences no one should have to carry. Billy kept his personal life locked up tight. Music was the only thing he ever really put on display.
One time he's got this boy, this like actor / model with him, very nice, but within the first 3 minutes he manages to take his shirt off. And Billy's just staring at me, and I stared at him. I said, "So do y'all have any children together?" And he just went like this, his shoulders went, he looked back, he said, "No, but we sure are working at it."
He never made a big public statement about being gay, but the people in his circle knew. He'd bring partners along to tours and studio sessions, introducing them as cousins or friends. When the documentary team tracked down some of the men he'd been with, none of them wanted to be on camera. Even so, their stories helped paint a fuller picture of who he was. The weight he carried showed up in different ways: struggles with addiction, run-ins with the law, personal battles he never completely won. But none of it stopped him from becoming a legend. He worked with some of the biggest names in music, leaving his fingerprints all over the industry. His playing brought joy to millions, even while he was fighting his own demons behind the scenes. His story wasn't just tragic, it was real. Too many people, both in and out of the industry, have lived through similar pain without ever feeling seen. Talking about it isn't about reducing him to his struggles. It's about making space for the truth, especially for those who have spent their lives feeling like they had to keep theirs hidden. Billy only came out in group therapy toward the end. His personal struggles ran even deeper, shaped by the childhood trauma and later complicated by legal troubles, addiction, and financial hardships.
We like to wake up in the morning, sing, go party, chase girls.
As an adult, he battled addiction to alcohol and cocaine, a habit he admitted once cost him $1,000 a day. His substance abuse led to multiple arrests, including a 1991 incident when he was charged with sexual battery, showing pornography to a minor, and cocaine possession. According to reports, a 16-year-old boy alleged that Preston had picked him up in Malibu, smoked cocaine, and shown him pornographic images before attempting to assault him in a barn behind his home. The teen managed to escape, and Preston was later arrested at the property. However, the sexual assault charge was ultimately dismissed. His troubles didn't stop there. In 1997, while already in jail for violating parole on a cocaine possession charge, Preston was convicted of staging a fire at his home as part of a $1 million insurance fraud scheme. He served additional time at Avenel State Prison, where he led the prison choir and religious services, an experience that finally helped him turn the corner on his addictions.
Big part of what we were doing. In those days, they took pills, red Secanols and Truanols, and a lot of grass and a lot of alcohol. Enough drugs to build an empire.
His legal troubles were stacking up, and another one of the most intense moments came when he was accused of attacking someone with a heavy object. Some said it was a hammer. The details were murky, but it was serious enough to land him in even deeper trouble. Billy's personal life took a brutal hit when the woman he was planning to marry, Kathy Silva, ended up with Sly Stone. Okay, so a little bit about Sly Stone. He wasn't just a musician. He flipped funk, soul, and rock on their heads. He built a sound that mixed trippy rock energy with deep funk grooves, sharp lyrics, and production tricks that would shape music for decades. His band broke barriers too. One of the first big acts with a fully mixed lineup, both racially and gender-wise, making waves way beyond just music. The hits were everywhere. His bass-heavy, drum-driven style basically became a blueprint for the future, influencing everyone from Prince to hip-hop producers who chopped up his tracks. But as his star rose, so did the chaos. Drugs took over, and by the time the industry needed him, he was missing shows, burning bridges, and fading out. That legendary energy turned unpredictable, and before long, he was barely in the game. Legal drama over money didn't help, and years later, headlines claimed he was living in a van.
Mr. Stone?
I'm going to rehab.
You're going to go to rehab?
Yeah.
So you are still using?
Well, no, but I want to be true with it, yeah.
Even with the downfall, his impact never faded. His fingerprints were all over modern music, his sound still echoed through generations, and his legacy was impossible to erase. Bill and Sly had been reportedly tight. He even played a big part in some of Sly's biggest tracks, but that friendship crashed and burned in the worst way possible. One day, Preston walked into his own home and found Stone in bed with Silva. That was it. Friendship over. Kathy ended up marrying Sly in a headline-grabbing ceremony at Madison Square Garden, but the damage had already been done. People close to Preston said that moment hit him hard. He was already dealing with a lot when it came to figuring himself out, and this just made things worse. After that, he pulled back from relationships with women completely and leaned into the drugs, cocaine especially. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was a breaking point.
A great deal of the drinking and a great deal of the drugs probably was suppressing a lot of things that he had to deal with early in life.
So, already on thin ice with the law, stuck on probation with the court breathing down his neck. But instead of laying low, he kept pushing his luck. Failed drug tests? Yeah. Other slip-ups? Most likely. The judge? Over it.
Drugs and alcohol make you do some stupid stuff, bro. Period. You know? You could be sane one minute, put some drugs in your blood, then you do some stuff you never thought you would do.
At some point, the warning stopped and the consequences kicked in. No more chances, no more excuses. He got hit with 30 days behind bars, and all because he couldn't stick to the rules from an old DUI case. Instead of keeping things chill, he ended up right where he didn't want to be.
I didn't know that Billy. That Billy was not the Billy that I made music with, and he would never hurt anybody.
Billy's name landed in another serious legal drama when he got caught up in a $1 million insurance scam with his ex-manager, Merle Otis Green, and a handful of others. The whole thing had been going on for years, burning down houses, faking break-ins, and staging car accidents just to cash in on insurance money. When the case finally blew up, the charges were no joke. If things went south in court, they were all looking at decades behind bars. By the time the charges hit, Billy was already behind bars for breaking probation. Turns out part of the scam involved him allegedly setting his own house on fire. When it all came crashing down, he took a plea deal, admitting to insurance fraud and agreeing to snitch on the rest of the crew. In exchange, he got probation, a year in jail, which didn't really change much since he was already locked up, and a $60,000 bill to pay back. Locked up at Avenel, Billy tried to turn things around. He got deep into religious services, led the prison choir, and supposedly kicked his drug habit. After everything he'd been through, it looked like he was trying to rewrite his story. But no matter how much he tried to course correct, his name was always tied to both his musical brilliance and the chaos that followed him.
It stunned everybody. It was just an unfortunate circumstance of the things he was doing at that time, his lifestyle.
Despite his legendary contributions to music, including his unforgettable piano solo on the Beatles' Get Back and co-writing Joe Cocker's You Are So Beautiful, Preston's demons overshadowed much of his later years. Financial struggles, hefty legal fees, and his time in and out of jail led him to declare bankruptcy twice. His health also suffered. He battled chronic kidney disease, underwent a kidney transplant in 2002, and eventually required dialysis several times a week. Even while touring, his team had to coordinate treatments city by city. In 2006, Billy Preston passed away at 59 due to complications from kidney disease and pericarditis. His life was a whirlwind of triumphs and tragedies, a reminder that even the most gifted musicians are not immune to the weight of their past.
Keyboard legend and fifth Beatle, Billy Preston has died after a long illness as a result of a malignant hypertension.
Billy's health had been on a downward spiral for years. Hypertension wrecked his kidneys, and even after getting a transplant, things didn't get much better. At some point, he checked himself into rehab in Malibu, probably hoping to turn things around. But that's where things took a turn for the worse. He developed pericarditis, his lungs gave out, and he slipped into a coma. He never woke up.
As a result of the medical condition, Billy'd been in a deep coma since last November 21st, but was still struggling to recover. Preston died at Shea Scottsdale Hospital in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he lived the last couple of years.
His send-off was nothing short of legendary. It stretched for hours, packed with music royalty. Joe Cocker sang Little Richard Had Something to Say, and a brass band flipped Amazing Grace into something unforgettable. A gospel choir kept the energy going, and big names like Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones, and Eric Clapton sent letters, making sure his impact wasn't forgotten. When it was all over, he was laid to rest in Inglewood.
Nothing from nothing leaves nothing. You gotta have something.
See, Billy wasn't just good on the keys. He owned them. Put him in front of a Hammond or a Fender Rhodes, and it was game over. His sound wasn't just recognizable, it was unmistakable. The kind of playing that made other musicians stop and go, yeah, that's him. Miles Davis was so into Billy's playing that he straight up named a whole track after him. That's how much respect the jazz icon had for his skills. Ringo Starr couldn't get enough of him either. During rehearsals for Concert for George, he made it clear Billy wasn't just good, he was one of the best to ever touch a Hammond. And according to him, Billy never hit a wrong note. Ever. Keyboardists practically considered him a god. Rick Wakeman once said every keyboard player he knew was obsessed with Billy's sound. It didn't matter if it was a piano, organ, or Rhodes. His touch had something otherworldly that made it his. Even long after his peak, his name was still making waves. A documentary about his life got the green light, with Paris Barclay in charge. Then John Batiste stepped up to play him in Saturday Night, proving his story wasn't fading anytime soon. And just to drive the point home, the Daily Telegraph put him in their top 5 greatest keyboardists ever, calling him the gold standard of R&B keys. Now let's talk about the incredible career Billy had. Some people threw his name into the fifth Beatle conversation, and honestly, they weren't wrong. He first crossed paths with them in the early 60s, but by the time they were in the studio working on Get Back, he was right there with them, laying down organ and electric piano like he was always part of the crew. At one point, John was all for making it official and bringing him into the band, but Paul shut it down, saying they already struggled to agree on anything as 4. He still made it onto the Get Back single as a featured artist. the only person ever credited alongside them after they became a full-on global phenomenon. His keys were front and center on the track, and when they hit the rooftop for their final live performance, he was right there, backing them up. His work with the Beatles didn't stop there. He popped up on Abbey Road, sneaking in some organ on I Want You, She's So Heavy, and Something. And when George Harrison went solo, he stayed in the mix. Not only did he drop his own album under the Beatles' Apple label, with George producing, but he was the first to record My Sweet Lord before it became a worldwide hit. He played on George's records, helped make the concert for Bangladesh happen, toured with him, and even performed at the concert for George Tribute years later. His name wasn't just in the Beatles' orbit, he was part of their story. His solo career took off in the 70s, jumping from Apple to A&M, where he really hit his stride. His instrumental Uta Space exploded, bringing the clavinet sound into funk in a way no one could ignore. It was a huge hit, topped the R&B charts, and even snagged him a Grammy. He kept the momentum going, scoring back-to-back number ones with Will It Go Round in Circles and Nothing from Nothing, plus another top 5 smash with Space Race. That last one got so much love that American Bandstand used it as their break music for years. Meanwhile, the Rolling Stones had him all over their albums, from Sticky Fingers to Black and Blue. He wasn't just a studio guest, he was touring with them, even opening their shows with his own band before jumping in on keys. But eventually, money drama got in the way, and they went their separate ways. Even after that, he still showed up on solo projects for Mick Jagger and the rest of the gang. His career took a turn in the 80s when addiction issues started catching up with him, but that didn't stop him from working. He linked up with Motown for a while, scored a duet hit with Sarita Wright, and kept the session gigs rolling, playing with Luther Vandross, Whitney Houston, and Patti LaBelle. He even ran the music for a late-night talk show. Clapton brought him on tour. Ringo had him join his live band, and at one point, he was even invited to be part of the band after their pianist passed away. But things took a dark turn, and legal trouble put a stop to that chapter. Billy was out here doing the most, even while dealing with health issues. He linked up with an Italian band, laid down tracks in Europe, and kept the music flowing. Somewhere in the mix, he played keys for a comedy show, then popped up in Blues Brothers 2000 with a stacked lineup of musicians. No slowing down. While he was on the road, he got the heartbreaking news that George Harrison had passed. That loss hit hard, but when it came time to honor him, he showed up and delivered. At the tribute concert, he took on My Sweet Lord, and people couldn't stop talking about it. His voice, his playing, it was one of those moments. He also did Isn't It a Pity, and put in work on the organ throughout the show. Still, he wasn't done. He played on Johnny Cash's album, adding his magic to some of the tracks. Then it was back to touring, hitting the stage with Steve Winwood and the Funk Brothers before linking with Clapton for another round of shows. Somewhere in between, he made a stop in France, where he and Sam Moore teamed up for a duet, which ended up being the last time he was filmed performing. He was part of Ray Charles's collab album too, bringing his signature touch to a track with Norah Jones. And when American Idol needed someone to step in for a special finale moment, he sat at the piano, proving once again why his presence was different. He even found time to record the theme song for an anime series. The man was everywhere. Even when he was barely hanging on health-wise, music still called him. The Red Hot Chili Peppers sent over a track, and as soon as he heard it, he got up, laid down some parts, then went right back to resting. His last recorded work showed up on projects with Neil Diamond, Clapton, and J.J. Cale. Pure, soulful, unmistakably him. His final time on stage came when they re-released the concert for Bangladesh. He ran through a set of Harrison's songs, and for the last one, he had Donnie Harrison on guitar and Ringo behind the drums. It was a full-circle moment, one last reminder of just how deeply he was connected to the music and the people in it.